My adopted daughter spent years trying to erase my biological daughter from our family and from her own life. Her whole scheme blew up at her graduation party. We adopted Haley when she was 8 after fostering her for 2 years, and she was amazing with our biological daughter Chloe, who was 6 at the time. But something changed when Haley hit high school, and suddenly she started acting like Chloe didn't exist. It started with Haley telling people she was an only child. When kids from school came over, she'd hide all of Chloe's photos and tell visitors that the second bedroom was a guest room. If Chloe tried to come say hi, Haley would physically block the doorway and say, "The adults are talking, go play somewhere else." She wasn't the adult, she was 15, but she'd make Chloe feel like some random neighbor kid who'd wandered in. Haley figured out how to crop Chloe out of family photos on social media. Every single family vacation photo she posted was edited to remove her sister. She'd post captions like, "Only child life means all the attention," and "So blessed my parents chose me and only me." When relatives commented asking about Chloe, she'd delete their comments immediately. She made this elaborate story about being her parents' miracle baby after years of trying. She told everyone at school that her parents couldn't have biological children, so they adopted her and poured all their love into their only child. When teachers mentioned meeting both daughters at conferences, Haley would say they must be confusing us with another family. At home, she was completely different. She'd act like the perfect sister when we were watching, but the second we left the room, she'd tell Chloe, "When I turn 18, I'm going to convince them to send you to boarding school. They only need one daughter, and I was here first." Chloe started having anxiety attacks about being sent away, but was too scared to tell us because Haley said we'd be angry at her for causing problems. The school events were the worst. Haley would sign up to volunteer at the check-in table, then mark Chloe as absent so she couldn't attend. She'd tell us Chloe's events were canceled, then tell Chloe we had work obligations. We missed Chloe's art show, her piano recital, and her science fair because Haley kept lying about the dates and times. She'd delete emails from Chloe's teachers before we could see them. During family gatherings, Haley would send Chloe on fake errands to keep her away. "Mom needs you to get something from the car," she'd say, then lock the door behind her. By the time Chloe got back inside, everyone would be eating and there'd be no place set for her. Haley would shrug and say, "I thought you already ate." She stole Chloe's birthday cards from relatives and kept the money. She'd intercept packages addressed to Chloe and donate them, claiming they were duplicates of things she already had. When Chloe's grandmother on my side sent her a family heirloom necklace, Haley took it and told everyone it had been meant for her. This went on for 3 years. 3 years of Haley systematically erasing her sister from existence, while we were too busy working to notice all the signs. Chloe became quieter and quieter until she barely spoke at family dinners. We thought she was just becoming a teenager, but really she'd been trained to be invisible in her own home. Everything came crashing down at Haley's high school graduation party. We'd invited everyone, including extended family, teachers, and Haley's friends. Haley had made a slideshow of her childhood to play during the party, showing her growth over the years. She'd spent weeks editing every photo to remove Chloe. What Haley didn't know was that Chloe's teacher, Mrs. Kim, had become suspicious about why we never responded to her emails about Chloe's struggles. She'd started documenting everything and reached out to my sister, who confirmed we had 2 daughters, not 1. They planned to attend the graduation party together. The slideshow started playing, and it was photo after photo of Haley alone. Birthday parties where Chloe had been cropped out. Christmas mornings where Chloe's presents had been edited away. Vacation photos where you could see the bad Photoshop job removing a whole person. Haley stood there beaming as everyone watched. Then Mrs. Kim stood up. "Excuse me, but where's your other daughter in these photos?" "Chloe?" Haley's face went white. "I don't have a sister," she said automatically. My sister pulled out her phone. "That's funny because I have the original versions of these exact photos." She started airdropping them to everyone at the party. The real photos with both daughters. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Haley's best friend Ashley said, "Wait, you told me you were an only child. You said your parents couldn't have biological kids." That's when Chloe walked in holding a box. She carried it like it weighed nothing, but everyone in that room knew what was inside would crush us all. The box hit the gift table with a thud that made people jump, and then Chloe turned it upside down. Birthday cards spilled out first, dozens of them, still in their envelopes with her name written in my mother's handwriting, my sister's handwriting I didn't even recognize because we'd never seen these cards arrive. Then came packages, small ones wrapped in birthday paper that had never been opened, Christmas paper that looked years old. The family heirloom necklace my mother had sent rolled across the table and caught the light. I remembered when Haley had worn that necklace to a family dinner 2 years ago and told everyone our mother had given it to her as a special gift. The last thing out of the box was a spiral notebook, the kind kids use for school, and Chloe placed it carefully on top of the pile. Nobody moved. The slideshow was still playing behind Haley, showing her alone at the beach where I clearly remembered both girls building sandcastles together. My husband's fingers dug into my arm hard enough to hurt. I couldn't feel my legs. Everything in my body went cold and heavy at the same time. Mrs. Kim walked up to the table and picked up the notebook, opening it to a random page. She cleared her throat and started reading out loud about an email she'd sent us in March about Chloe missing an art show. I never got that email. Mrs. Kim said she'd sent 5 more emails after that, each one more worried than the last, asking why we weren't responding and if everything was okay at home. Every single one had been deleted before we ever saw them. She explained how she'd started keeping her own records when she realized something was wrong, how she'd documented every missed event, and every time Chloe showed up to the school looking anxious and exhausted. The room was so quiet I could hear people breathing. Haley's face had gone from white to bright red, the kind of red that happens right before someone throws up or passes out. She took a step backward toward the door. That's when guests started pulling out their phones. My sister had airdropped the original photos to everyone, and now people were swiping between the edited versions from Haley's slideshow and the real ones. A cousin held up her phone to show the person next to her. In Haley's version, she stood alone in front of the Christmas tree. In the real photo, Chloe sat right beside her holding a stuffed animal she'd gotten that morning. Someone gasped. Someone else said something under their breath. Haley took another step toward the door. Ashley stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. She walked right up to Haley with her phone in her hand, holding it up between them. Her voice came out shaky but loud enough for everyone to hear. She said she'd been Haley's best friend for 3 years. 3 years of sleepovers and late-night talks and sharing everything. 3 years of Haley telling her about being an only child, about how her parents had tried for years to have kids and couldn't, so they adopted her instead. Ashley's hand was shaking as she held up the phone showing a photo of both girls at what looked like Chloe's 13th birthday party. She asked Haley how many other things she'd lied about. She asked if their entire friendship had been fake. Haley opened her mouth but nothing came out. My husband moved fast for someone who usually takes his time with everything. He stepped in front of the door before Haley could reach it and told her she needed to stay. His voice didn't sound like him. It was hard and flat and cold. He told her she needed to face what she'd done. I couldn't move. I stood there frozen between my 2 daughters. Chloe had her shoulders back and her chin up, standing taller than I'd seen her stand in years. Haley looked trapped, her eyes darting around the room looking for an exit that wasn't there. The truth was just sitting there on the gift table in a pile of stolen cards and packages, and that notebook full of 3 years of documented cruelty. There was nowhere left for Haley to hide. People started leaving. Not all at once, but in small groups, whispering to each other as they headed for the door. My husband moved aside to let them pass, but kept his eyes on Haley. I could see relatives shooting looks at us, the kind of looks that said they were judging us for being the kind of parents who didn't notice their own daughter being erased. An aunt I barely knew grabbed her purse and left without saying goodbye. One of Haley's teachers stopped on his way out and said something to her that I couldn't hear, but whatever it was made her face crumble. Within 10 minutes, the room had cleared except for my sister, Mrs. Kim, and the 4 of us. My sister walked over to the gift table and picked up the notebook. Mrs. Kim joined her and they started reading through it together, flipping pages slowly. Haley sank down onto the couch and pulled her knees up to her chest. She wouldn't look at anyone. The notebook was thick, maybe 100 pages, and my sister said every single page was filled with Chloe's handwriting, dates and times and details. March 15th, Haley told me Mom and Dad didn't want to come to my piano recital. April 3rd, Haley took the birthday card from Grandma and I watched her put it in her backpack. May 22nd, Haley locked me out of the house during dinner and told everyone I'd already eaten. Mrs. Kim's voice broke when she read that one out loud. The entries went back 3 full years. 3 years of Haley telling Chloe she was going to convince us to send her to boarding school. 3 years of hiding photos and intercepting mail and making sure Chloe missed every school event that mattered. 3 years of my younger daughter documenting her own erasure because she was too scared to tell us what was happening. I made myself walk over to Haley. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I sat down on the couch next to her and tried to make my voice sound normal when I asked her to explain. She pulled her knees in tighter and said I didn't understand. I waited. She said it again. I asked her to help me understand then, to tell me why she did this. She said it wasn't fair. That was all she would say. It wasn't fair, over and over, but she wouldn't explain what she meant. My husband had moved to the gift table where the birthday cards were spread out. He picked one up and opened it. Inside was a card from his mother with $50 and a note about how proud she was of Chloe for making honor roll. The date was from 2 years ago. He opened another one. This one was from my aunt with a gift card to Chloe's favorite bookstore. He kept opening them, one after another, and I could see his hands starting to shake. Each card was addressed to Chloe. Each one had money or a gift card inside. Each one had a personal note from a family member who thought they were staying connected to their niece or granddaughter or cousin. We'd never known any of these people were trying to reach her. My husband's face was wet. He wasn't making any noise, but tears were running down his cheeks as he read card after card from relatives who must have thought we were keeping Chloe away from them on purpose. Mrs. Kim came over and put her hand on my shoulder. She said we needed help. Professional help. She said this wasn't something we could fix on our own with family talks and apologies. She pulled a business card out of her purse and handed it to me. The card said Melanie Horton, family therapist, and listed some specialties including sibling conflict and adoption issues. Mrs. Kim said Melanie had helped other families through hard situations, and that we should call her as soon as possible. I put the card in my pocket and nodded because I couldn't think of what else to do. After Mrs. Kim and my sister finally left, the four of us just sat there in the living room surrounded by evidence. The birthday cards were still spread across the gift table. The packages sat in a pile. The notebook lay open to a page from last October where Chloe had written about Haley telling her she was going to be sent away. I didn't know where to start. How do you begin to address 3 years of this? How do you even start that conversation? I looked at my husband and he looked at me and neither of us knew what to say. Chloe got up without a word and walked toward the stairs. I heard her bedroom door close and then I heard the lock click. I'd installed that lock myself 2 years ago when she asked for privacy. I'd thought it was normal teenage stuff. I got up and went to her door and knocked. My voice sounded wrong when I called her name. She said through the door that she didn't want to talk right now. I asked if I could just sit with her. She said no. I pressed my forehead against the door and tried to think of what to say, but everything that came to mind sounded stupid and empty. I'm sorry felt like nothing compared to 3 years. I went back downstairs. Haley was still on the couch in the same position. My husband was reading through the notebook now, turning pages slowly. Then Haley spoke. She said Chloe was being dramatic. She said Chloe was making her look bad on purpose. She said it like she believed it, like she genuinely thought she was the victim here. My husband's head snapped up. He stood up so fast the notebook fell on the floor. He started yelling. I'd never heard him yell like that, not in 15 years of marriage. He yelled about the lies and the stolen cards and the 3 years of systematic cruelty. He yelled about how Haley had made her sister invisible in her own home. His voice cracked when he said Chloe had been living in fear, and we'd been too blind to see it. Haley started crying, but my husband didn't stop. He said she needed to understand what she'd done. He said she'd hurt someone who loved her and trusted her. He said she'd nearly destroyed her sister. Then he walked out of the room and I heard the garage door open and his car start. He just left. I sat there with Haley while she cried into her knees. Part of me wanted to comfort her because she was my daughter, and I'd spent 10 years loving her and raising her. Another part of me wanted to shake her and demand to know how she could do this. I did neither. I just sat there feeling like I was drowning. Eventually, Haley's crying stopped and she got up and went to her room without looking at me. I heard her door close but not lock. I stayed on the couch. The evidence was still everywhere. Birthday cards with money still inside them. Packages that had never been opened. That notebook full of pain. I picked it up and started reading from the beginning. The first entry was from 3 years and 2 months ago, right after Haley started high school. It said Haley told her friends at the school that she was an only child. The entries got worse from there. I read about every lie, every manipulation, every time Chloe had been made to feel like she didn't belong in her own family. She'd written it all down in careful handwriting, dating each entry, noting what time things happened. It read like a legal document, like she was building a case against her own sister because she knew nobody would believe her otherwise. She'd been right. We hadn't believed her. We'd dismissed her quietness as teenage moodiness. We'd missed every sign. My husband came back around midnight. He looked exhausted. He didn't say where he'd been, and I didn't ask. We stayed up all night going through everything. We found more notebooks in Chloe's box, smaller ones tucked underneath the first. One was full of screenshots from Haley's social media showing all the edited photos and captions about being an only child. Another contained printed emails between Haley and her friends where she talked about her life as an only child. We found lists in Haley's handwriting tracking Chloe's schedule, noting when she had school events, so Haley could make sure to sabotage them. We found a document on Haley's laptop, left open, titled Only Child Story, with bullet points of lies she'd told different people to keep her story straight. Every piece of evidence made it worse. This wasn't impulsive teenage cruelty. This was planned and systematic and sustained over 3 years. My husband kept saying he should have noticed. I kept thinking about all the times Chloe had tried to tell us something was wrong and we'd been too busy or too tired or too focused on work to really listen. The sun came up and neither of us had slept. Haley came downstairs acting like it was a normal day. She asked what time we were leaving for her graduation brunch. We'd planned a big brunch at her favorite restaurant with extended family to celebrate. She stood in the kitchen in her pajamas asking about the brunch like last night hadn't happened. My husband looked at her for a long moment and then said there wasn't going to be a brunch. He said there was nothing to celebrate right now. Haley's face changed. She said we were being unfair. She said we were ruining her graduation over Chloe's lies. My husband's voice went quiet in that dangerous way where you know someone is barely holding it together. He said these weren't lies. He said we had 3 years of documentation and dozens of witnesses, and Haley's own handwritten notes tracking her sister's schedule. He said Haley needed to stop calling Chloe a liar. That's when Haley started screaming. She screamed that we were taking Chloe's side. She screamed that we'd always loved Chloe more because she was our biological daughter. She screamed that nothing she did was ever good enough. She threw her phone across the kitchen and it hit the wall and cracked. She said we were ruining her life over stupid sister drama. My husband told her to go to her room. She screamed that she was 18 and he couldn't tell her what to do. He said as long as she lived in our house, she'd follow our rules, and right now the rule was to go to her room before he said something he'd regret. She went, but she slammed every door on the way. I realized something sitting there in the kitchen listening to those doors slam. Haley genuinely didn't think she'd done anything wrong. She saw herself as the victim. She thought we were overreacting. That scared me more than anything else that had happened. I went upstairs to check on Chloe. Her door was still locked. I knocked and said her name. No answer. I knocked again and said I just wanted to make sure she was okay. I heard movement inside and then a sound that made my stomach drop. She was breathing wrong, fast and harsh, like she couldn't get enough air. I tried the door, but it wouldn't open. I called her name louder. The breathing got worse. I ran downstairs and got my husband, and we stood outside her door calling to her. Finally, she managed to say she couldn't breathe. My husband got a screwdriver and popped the lock. Chloe was sitting on her bed with her knees pulled up, hyperventilating so badly her lips were turning blue. I sat down next to her and tried to remember what you're supposed to do for panic attacks. I told her to breathe with me. I made my breathing slow and loud so she could hear it. It took forever, but gradually her breathing started to match mine. My husband sat on her other side and held her hand. When she could finally talk, she said she was scared. She said Haley had always told her we were going to send her away when Haley turned 18. She said Haley promised her that once she didn't need to pretend anymore, she'd convince us we only needed one daughter. She said she'd been waiting for 3 years for us to tell her she had to leave. She asked if we were going to send her to boarding school now. My husband started crying again. He told her we would never send her away. He told her she was our daughter, and this was her home, and nothing would ever change that. He kept saying it over and over while holding her. It took an hour of sitting with her and talking to her before she calmed down enough to believe we weren't going to abandon her. Even then, I could see the fear in her eyes. Haley had spent 3 years making her believe she was disposable. My husband called Mrs. Kim for advice. She said we needed to take Chloe to see her doctor right away. She said this level of anxiety wasn't something we could handle on our own. She gave us the number for Chloe's pediatrician and said to call them as soon as they opened and explain it was urgent. We got an appointment that afternoon. Chloe sat between us in the waiting room, not talking, just staring at her hands. When the doctor called us back, she asked Chloe questions about how she'd been feeling. Chloe started talking, and once she started, she couldn't stop. 3 years came pouring out. She told the doctor about the threats and the manipulation and the systematic isolation. She described being locked out of family gatherings and having her mail stolen and being marked absent from the school events she'd registered for. She talked about living in constant fear that we were going to send her away. She said she'd stopped sleeping well 2 years ago because she was afraid she'd wake up and we'd be driving her to boarding school. She said she'd started keeping the notebook because she knew nobody would believe her without proof. The doctor listened to everything and then did some kind of assessment, asking Chloe more questions about her anxiety and sleep and whether she ever felt safe. When she was done, she told us Chloe had severe anxiety disorder. She said Chloe had been living in a constant state of fear and hypervigilance in her own home for 3 years. She explained that this kind of prolonged psychological abuse could have lasting effects on Chloe's mental health and development. She wrote a prescription for anti-anxiety medication and said Chloe needed to start therapy immediately, not next month or next week, but immediately. She gave us referrals for 3 therapists who specialized in adolescent trauma and told us to call all of them today because Chloe needed help now. She said the damage from this kind of sustained psychological abuse doesn't heal quickly or easily. She said we needed to prepare for a long road ahead. We left the doctor's office with a prescription and 3 phone numbers and the weight of knowing we'd let our daughter suffer for 3 years without noticing. I spent the next 3 days fielding calls from relatives who'd heard about what happened at the party. My sister had sent the original photos to everyone in the family group chat, and now my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. My aunt called first, asking if the photos Haley posted were really edited. I explained the whole situation while sitting in my car in the work parking lot because I couldn't face going inside. She listened quietly, and then said she always thought something seemed off about how Haley talked about being an only child at family events. My cousin called next, and I had to go through it all again. Each time I told the story, I felt smaller and more ashamed that we'd missed 3 years of abuse happening under our own roof. My uncle was supportive and offered to help with therapy costs. My husband's sister called and suggested we were overreacting and that sisters fight all the time. I told her this wasn't normal sibling rivalry, and she got defensive, saying we were being too hard on Haley. My husband's brother said the same thing when he called later that day. He kept saying that Haley was just trying to fit in at the school, and we were making too big a deal out of teenage drama. I got so angry I hung up on him. By the end of the week, half the family was supportive and the other half thought we were ruining Haley's life over nothing. The division made everything worse because now we couldn't even rely on family support. Haley got an email from her college 4 days after the party. She came downstairs holding her phone with a strange look on her face and said the admissions office wanted her to call them. My husband and I exchanged glances but didn't say anything. She went back upstairs to make the call, and we could hear her voice getting louder and more upset. She came down 20 minutes later with tears streaming down her face. Someone from the graduation party had contacted the college about what happened. The admissions office told her they'd received concerning information about her character and wanted to discuss whether her enrollment should proceed. She was crying harder than I'd ever seen her cry and begging us to fix it. She kept saying this wasn't fair and that one mistake shouldn't ruin her whole future. My husband looked at her for a long moment and then said she needed to face the consequences of her choices. She screamed that we didn't understand and ran back upstairs. I started to follow her, but my husband grabbed my arm and shook his head. He said we couldn't protect her from this. I knew he was right, but hearing my daughter sob in her room made my chest hurt. We scheduled a family meeting for that evening after Chloe got home from my sister's house. All four of us sat in the living room, and within 5 minutes, it turned into a screaming match. Haley insisted that Chloe was lying and making everything worse on purpose. She said she was just trying to fit in at the school and didn't mean any real harm. Chloe sat quietly at first, but then pulled out her phone. She played a voice recording she'd secretly made 6 months ago. Haley's voice came through the speaker, clear and cold, telling Chloe that when she turned 18, she was going to convince us to send Chloe to boarding school because we only needed one daughter. The recording went on for 2 minutes with Haley describing exactly how she'd manipulate us into thinking Chloe would be better off somewhere else. Haley's face went white when she heard her own voice. She tried to grab the phone, but Chloe pulled it away. My husband asked if there were more recordings, and Chloe nodded. She said she had dozens of them saved in a hidden folder because she knew nobody would believe her without proof. Haley just sat there staring at the floor, not saying anything. I asked her if she had anything to say for herself, and she whispered that she was sorry. I asked what she was sorry for specifically, and she couldn't answer. She just kept saying sorry over and over without explaining what she was apologizing for. After Chloe went back to her room, my husband and I stayed up talking about what to do next. For the first time in our marriage, we completely disagreed about how to handle something this serious. He wanted to make Haley defer college for a year and stay home to make amends and work on herself. I was worried about damaging her future opportunities and wondered if letting her go to college might give everyone space to heal. He got angry and said I was prioritizing Haley's comfort over Chloe's safety again. I got defensive and said I was trying to think about both daughters. We went back and forth for over an hour, getting louder and more frustrated. He brought up all the times I'd made excuses for Haley's behavior over the years. I brought up all the times he'd been too busy with work to notice what was happening at home. We ended up arguing about our work schedules and how we'd both failed as parents by being too focused on our careers. He said we never should have worked such long hours when the girls needed us home. I said we were both responsible for that choice. By the time we went to bed, we were barely speaking to each other. I lay awake realizing that this situation had damaged our marriage too. We'd always been a team, but now we were on opposite sides trying to figure out how to fix something we'd both broken. The next morning, I took Chloe to her first therapy appointment with a psychologist who specialized in working with teenagers who'd been through trauma. The waiting room had soft chairs and calming paintings on the walls. Chloe sat next to me, picking at her fingernails and not making eye contact. When the therapist called us back, she introduced herself and explained how the session would work. She asked Chloe if she wanted me to stay or wait outside. Chloe said I could stay. The therapist started with easy questions about school and hobbies. Chloe gave short answers at first, but the therapist was patient and kept drawing her out with follow-up questions. After about 20 minutes, Chloe started talking more freely about what had been happening at home. She described the constant fear and the feeling of being invisible in her own family. The therapist listened carefully and took notes. She asked Chloe about her anxiety and sleep patterns. Chloe admitted she hadn't slept well in over 2 years because she was always worried about what Haley would do next. By the end of the hour session, Chloe had told the therapist things I'd never heard before. After Chloe went to the waiting room, the therapist asked to speak with me privately. She said Chloe showed classic signs of long-term emotional abuse. She explained that Chloe had been living in a constant state of fear and that it would take a lot of work to help her rebuild her sense of safety and self-worth. She recommended twice-weekly sessions for at least 6 months. I sat there taking it all in and trying not to cry. The therapist put her hand on my arm and said Chloe was strong and with proper support she would heal, but it wouldn't be quick or easy. 2 days later, Haley's best friend Ashley showed up at our house unannounced. She rang the doorbell, and when I answered, she asked to talk to Haley. Her face was red and her jaw was tight. I called Haley downstairs and they went out to the front yard. Within minutes, they were yelling at each other loud enough that neighbors started coming out to watch. Ashley told Haley she felt betrayed and used. She said their whole friendship had been based on Haley's lies, and she didn't know if she could forgive her. Haley tried to explain that she just wanted to fit in and didn't think it was a big deal. Ashley cut her off and said making up an entire fake life and erasing your sister from existence was a huge deal. She said she'd trusted Haley and told her personal things, and now she didn't know what was real and what was another lie. Haley started crying and tried to minimize what she'd done. She said she only lied about having a sister and everything else about their friendship was real. Ashley shook her head and said if Haley could lie about something that big, then she could lie about anything. She told Haley not to contact her anymore and walked away. Haley stood in the yard crying while 3 neighbors watched from their porches. My husband went out and brought her inside. She ran upstairs and slammed her door. I looked out the window and saw the neighbors still standing there talking and looking at our house. I closed the curtains and sat down, feeling like our whole life was falling apart in front of the entire neighborhood. The school counselor called the next afternoon. His name was Tiago Garcia, and he said he needed to meet with us about Chloe's academic situation. We scheduled a meeting for the following day. When we arrived at his office, he had a folder full of papers spread across his desk. He explained that Chloe's grades had dropped significantly over the past 3 years. She'd gone from being an A student to barely passing most of her classes. He showed us attendance records for school activities. There were at least 15 events where Chloe had registered to participate, but was marked absent. He pulled out sign-in sheets from the school talent show, the art exhibition, and several club meetings. Each one showed Chloe's name crossed out with a note that she hadn't shown up. My husband asked how that was possible since Chloe had definitely been at the school those days. Mr. Garcia said someone had been signing in at the check-in tables and marking Chloe absent before she could get there. We realized it had been Haley volunteering at those events and sabotaging her sister's participation. Mr. Garcia said he'd suspected something was wrong, but hadn't been able to figure out what, until Mrs. Kim reached out to him after the graduation party. He recommended accommodations for Chloe's anxiety, including extended time on tests and the option to take breaks during class. He also suggested summer school to help her make up for the opportunities she'd missed. He said Chloe was a bright student who'd been held back by circumstances beyond her control. He wanted to help her get back on track academically. We thanked him and scheduled a follow-up meeting to create an official accommodation plan. That evening, Haley's college called. The admissions counselor said they were putting her enrollment on hold pending a character review. They wanted us to provide context about the situation before making a final decision. My husband and I sat at the kitchen table trying to figure out what to say. We wanted to be honest, but we were also her parents and didn't want to destroy her future completely. We spent 2 hours drafting an email that acknowledged there had been serious family conflict without going into every detail. We explained that Haley had made poor choices that hurt her sister, and that we were addressing it through therapy and consequences. We said Haley was taking responsibility and working to make amends. We emphasized that she'd always been a good student, and that we believed she could learn and grow from this. My husband read it over 3 times before we sent it. After we hit send, we just sat there not talking. I didn't know if we'd said too much or not enough. I didn't know if the college would give her another chance or reject her completely. All I knew was that every decision we made felt wrong no matter what we chose. My mother called 2 days later after my sister told her what had happened. Instead of offering support, she immediately started criticizing our parenting. She said we must have favored Chloe because she was our biological child, and that's why Haley acted out. I tried to explain that it was actually the opposite, but she wouldn't listen. She kept saying we'd probably made Haley feel like an outsider in her own family. I told her she had it completely backwards and that Haley had been the one doing the excluding. She said sibling rivalry was normal, and we were overreacting by involving therapists and colleges. I felt my anger building with every word she said. She suggested we were being too hard on Haley and not considering how difficult it must be to be adopted. I finally snapped and told her she didn't know what she was talking about because she hadn't been there to see what Chloe went through. She got offended and said I was being disrespectful. I hung up on her. My husband's brother called him that same day with similar opinions. He said we were making Haley into a villain when she was just a confused kid. My husband tried to explain the severity of what had happened, but his brother kept interrupting. They ended up in a heated argument that ended with my husband hanging up too. That night we realized our extended family was splitting into camps over this. Some people supported us and understood the seriousness. Others thought we were ruining Haley's life over typical teenage behavior. The division made us feel even more isolated and alone in trying to figure out how to fix our family. 3 weeks after the graduation party, Chloe asked if she could stay with my sister for a while. She said she didn't feel safe in the house with Haley. Those words broke my heart into pieces. My daughter didn't feel safe in her own home. The place that should have been her refuge had become somewhere she needed to escape from. My husband and I talked about it and agreed to let her go even though it killed us to admit our home wasn't safe for her. Chloe packed a bag with clothes and books while Haley stood in her doorway watching with an expression I couldn't read. It wasn't sad or guilty or angry. It was just blank. Chloe walked past her without saying anything and came downstairs with her bag. My sister arrived 20 minutes later. She helped Chloe load her things into the car and then turned to look at me. Her expression said everything she didn't say out loud. She blamed us for letting this happen. She blamed us for not noticing sooner. She blamed us for failing to protect Chloe. I wanted to defend myself, but I couldn't because she was right. We had failed. We stood in the driveway watching them drive away. My husband put his arm around me and I leaned against him. We'd lost both our daughters in different ways. One didn't feel safe with us and one had destroyed that safety. I didn't know how to get either of them back. With Chloe gone, the house felt different. Haley came downstairs the next morning and poured herself cereal like nothing had happened. She sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone and eating like it was any other day. My husband walked in and stopped when he saw her. I could see his jaw tighten. We'd talked until 3 in the morning about what to do next, and we'd agreed we needed to confront Haley directly about everything. My husband pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. I sat next to him. Haley looked up from her phone with this confused expression like she couldn't understand why we were both staring at her. My husband told her we needed to talk about what she'd done to Chloe. Haley put her spoon down, and her face got defensive immediately. She started to say something, but my husband held up his hand and told her she needed to listen first. I told Haley that what she'd done to her sister wasn't normal sibling conflict. It was abuse. The word hung in the air between us, and Haley's eyes went wide. She said we were being dramatic. My husband's voice got harder and he said no, we weren't being dramatic at all. He told Haley she'd spent 3 years systematically trying to erase her sister from existence. She'd lied to everyone. She'd stolen from Chloe. She'd manipulated us and sabotaged Chloe's life. Haley started crying and saying she was sorry. The tears came fast and her voice got shaky. But when I asked her what specifically she was sorry for, she couldn't answer. She just kept saying she was sorry for making Chloe upset. My husband leaned forward and told her that wasn't good enough. Making Chloe upset made it sound like she'd borrowed something without asking or said something mean once. He told Haley she'd hurt her sister deeply, and there would be real consequences for what she'd done. Haley wiped her eyes and asked what kind of consequences. My husband told her we were figuring that out, but she needed to understand that her life was going to change. I called the number Mrs. Kim had given me for the family therapist. A woman answered and said her name was Melanie Horton. I explained who I was and why I was calling, and my voice cracked halfway through. Melanie listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said she could see us within the week. She had an opening on Thursday afternoon. I thanked her and hung up and sat there staring at my phone. My husband was in his office working, and I walked down the hall to tell him about the appointment. He barely looked up from his computer. He said okay, and went back to typing. I stood in the doorway for a minute waiting for him to say something else, but he didn't. We'd been like this since Chloe left, barely speaking except when we had to. Every conversation turned into an argument about whose fault this was. My husband kept saying we should have noticed something was wrong. I kept saying Haley was good at hiding it and we couldn't have known. He'd say we should have been home more. I'd say we were both working the same amount. He'd say I was making excuses. I'd say he was blaming me. Round and round until one of us walked away. The tension in the house made it hard to breathe. I found myself crying at random times during the day. I'd be folding laundry or making coffee and suddenly tears would be running down my face. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times Chloe had tried to tell us something was wrong and we'd dismissed it. The quiet dinners where she barely spoke. The way she'd stopped asking us to come to her school events. The anxiety attacks we'd thought were just teenage stress. We'd failed her completely. The letter from Haley's college came 3 days later. I saw it in the mail and my stomach dropped. The return address was from the admissions office. I opened it standing in the driveway. The letter said Haley's enrollment was deferred for 1 year. She'd need to provide evidence of personal growth and community service before they'd reconsider her admission. They cited concerns about her character and maturity. I walked inside and found Haley in her room. I handed her the letter without saying anything. She read it and her face went white, then red. She looked up at me and said this was Chloe's fault. She said Chloe had ruined her life. I felt anger rise up in my chest so fast it shocked me. I told Haley that Chloe didn't ruin anything. Haley ruined it herself by lying and manipulating everyone for 3 years. Haley started crying again and saying it wasn't fair. My husband came upstairs and I showed him the letter. He read it and looked at Haley and told her she was lucky the college didn't reject her completely. He said she'd be spending the year at home making amends and figuring out how to be a decent person. Haley threw the letter on the floor and said we were all against her. My husband's voice stayed calm, but I could hear the anger underneath. He told Haley she was facing consequences for her own actions and she needed to accept that. Haley said she wanted to go to college and start over somewhere new. My husband said she wasn't running away from this. She was staying here and dealing with what she'd done. Thursday came and we drove to Melanie Horton's office. It was in a professional building near the hospital. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and magazines nobody was reading. A woman came out and introduced herself as Melanie. She was probably in her 50s with gray hair and a kind face. She shook our hands and asked where Chloe was. I explained that Chloe was staying with my sister and didn't want to come if Haley would be there. Melanie nodded like she'd expected this. She asked us to come into her office. It was a normal therapy office with a couch and chairs and a desk in the corner. Melanie sat in one of the chairs and we sat on the couch. Haley sat as far from us as possible. Melanie looked at the three of us and said she'd gotten some background from Mrs. Kim but wanted to hear from us directly. My husband started explaining what had happened and Haley interrupted to say everyone was exaggerating. Melanie held up her hand and told Haley she'd get her turn to speak, but right now she needed to listen. My husband continued and I added details he forgot. Melanie took notes and asked questions. After about 20 minutes, she put down her pen and said she needed to be honest with us. She said trying to do family therapy with all of us together right now would likely do more harm than good. Chloe needed to feel safe and in control. Forcing her into a room with Haley could make things worse. Melanie suggested we start with separate sessions. One with just my husband and me. One with each daughter individually. Later, when everyone was ready, we could try family sessions together. She explained that Chloe's recovery had to be the priority right now. Haley started to protest, but Melanie looked at her and said this wasn't negotiable. If Haley wanted to repair the relationship with her sister, she had to respect Chloe's boundaries. Our parent session with Melanie was scheduled for the following Tuesday. My husband and I drove there in silence. Melanie asked us to sit and started asking questions about our work schedules. How many hours we worked each week. How often we were home for dinner. How much we knew about the girls' daily lives. Each question felt like an accusation. My husband admitted he often worked late and traveled for business. I said I'd been taking on extra projects to pay for college. Melanie asked how we'd missed 3 years of systematic abuse happening in our own home. I started crying. My husband put his head in his hands. I told Melanie we'd been too focused on our careers. We'd assumed the girls were fine because Haley seemed so responsible. We'd thought Chloe was just being a moody teenager. Melanie didn't judge us, but she didn't let us off the hook either. She said we needed to make major changes in our priorities and presence at home. She asked if we were willing to cut back our work hours. My husband said yes immediately. I hesitated because I was worried about money, but then I said yes too. Melanie told us that Chloe needed to see real change from us. Words weren't enough. We had to show her through our actions that we were choosing her and choosing to be present. She asked if we understood that regaining Chloe's trust would take months or even years. We both nodded. Melanie said she also wanted to address something else. She asked if we'd been blaming each other. My husband and I looked at each other and I felt my face get hot. I admitted we'd been fighting a lot. Melanie said that was normal, but we needed to work through it together instead of turning on each other. She recommended couples counseling in addition to family therapy. I felt overwhelmed thinking about all the therapy we needed, but I knew she was right. Melanie met with Haley alone the next day. My husband and I waited in the lobby for an hour. When the session ended, Melanie asked us to come back in without Haley. Haley went to wait in the car. Melanie sat down and told us Haley showed signs of attachment issues and fear of abandonment related to her adoption. She explained that adoptees sometimes struggle with feeling secure in their families. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Haley had internalized the fear that being adopted meant she was replaceable. When we had Chloe biologically, it confirmed Haley's worst fear that we didn't really need her. She tried to eliminate the perceived competition for our love. Melanie was clear that this didn't excuse Haley's behavior. Understanding why someone does something terrible doesn't make it okay, but it helped explain the psychological roots. Melanie said Haley needed specialized help to work through her adoption trauma. She recommended that Haley start seeing Melanie's husband, Rodrigo, who was a psychologist specializing in adoption issues. I asked if Haley had shown any real remorse during the session. Melanie paused and said Haley was still very focused on how the situation had affected her. She wasn't fully grasping the impact on Chloe yet. That level of empathy would take time to develop. My husband asked how long the process would take. Melanie said honestly it could be years. There was no quick fix for this. We left feeling both relieved to have some answers and overwhelmed by how much work was ahead. Chloe's individual session with Melanie was 2 days later. My sister drove her there and waited while they talked. Afterward, Melanie called us and asked us to come in without Chloe. We drove over and Melanie's face was serious when we sat down. She said Chloe's session had revealed the full extent of the damage. Chloe had nightmares about being sent away almost every night. She had anxiety attacks when she heard Haley's voice. She'd lost confidence in her ability to trust anyone, including us. Melanie said Chloe was showing classic signs of long-term psychological abuse. She told us that Chloe's recovery would take significant time. We needed to prioritize her sense of safety above everything else, including Haley's feelings. I asked what that meant practically. Melanie said it meant Chloe got to decide when and how she interacted with Haley. It meant we couldn't push her to forgive or move on before she was ready. It meant if there was ever a conflict between Chloe's needs and Haley's needs, we chose Chloe. My husband agreed immediately. I felt torn because I didn't want to abandon Haley either, but I knew Melanie was right. She could see my hesitation and said this was going to create tension in our marriage. We'd have to navigate how to support both daughters without sacrificing Chloe's recovery. She said again that couples counseling would help us work through this together. I agreed to call a couples therapist that week. My sister brought Chloe home for a supervised visit on Saturday afternoon. Chloe had agreed to come, but only if Haley stayed in her room the whole time. My husband went upstairs and told Haley she needed to stay in her room until Chloe left. Haley complained, but he didn't argue with her. He just closed her door and came back downstairs. When Chloe walked in, she looked nervous. My sister stayed close to her. We sat in the living room and I asked Chloe about school and her friends. She answered, but her voice was quiet. My husband asked if she wanted to watch a movie and she said, "Okay." We put on something light and funny. As the movie played, I watched Chloe start to relax. She laughed at a joke and leaned back against the couch. My sister caught my eye and gave me a small smile. This was the most relaxed I'd seen Chloe in years. She wasn't watching the door or tensing up at every sound. She wasn't making herself small. She was just existing comfortably in her own home. It made me realize how much stress she'd been carrying all this time. After the movie ended, Chloe asked if she could get something from her room. She went upstairs and came back with a book. When it was time for her to leave, she stood by the door and looked at me. She asked if she could stay with my sister permanently. The question hit me like a physical blow. I had to work hard to keep my voice steady. I told her we wanted her home, but we understood she needed time. I said whenever she was ready, we'd be here. Chloe nodded and left with my sister. My husband and I stood in the doorway watching them drive away. He put his arm around me and I leaned against him. We stood there for a long time, not saying anything. Haley started working with Rodrigo Horton the following week. She had 3 sessions before he asked to meet with us. We went to his office, which was in the same building as Melanie's. Rodrigo was younger than I expected, with an easy smile. He asked us to sit and said he wanted to explain what he was seeing with Haley. He described how Haley had internalized the fear that being adopted meant she was replaceable. When we had Chloe biologically, it seemed to prove that we could have our own children, and therefore didn't really need Haley. She saw Chloe as evidence that she was second choice. Rodrigo explained that Haley tried to eliminate the competition by making Chloe invisible. If Chloe didn't exist, then Haley couldn't be replaced. He said this was a trauma response rooted in deep insecurity about her place in our family. I asked if Haley understood this now. Rodrigo said she was beginning to understand it intellectually, but emotional understanding would take longer. My husband asked if this meant Haley wasn't really responsible for what she did. Rodrigo shook his head and said no. Understanding the psychological roots didn't remove responsibility. Haley made choices every day for 3 years to hurt her sister. She knew it was wrong. The trauma explained her motivation, but didn't excuse her actions. My husband looked relieved by this answer. I could tell he'd been worried we were supposed to feel sorry for Haley and forget what she'd done to Chloe. Rodrigo said Haley needed to take full accountability for her choices while also working through the underlying trauma. Both things had to happen. We had another meeting with Melanie the next week to discuss next steps. She'd consulted with Rodrigo about both girls, and they'd come up with recommendations. Melanie said we needed to implement new family rules immediately. Haley had to get a part-time job and do community service. This would teach her responsibility and help her understand how to contribute positively. My husband and I needed to cut back our work hours significantly to be home more. Chloe got to decide when and how she interacted with Haley. No one could force her to spend time with her sister or forgive her before she was ready. Melanie handed us a written list of rules and expectations. My husband and I read through them and agreed to everything. That night, we sat Haley down and went over the new rules. She listened with her arms crossed. When we finished, she said it wasn't fair. She said we were punishing her. My husband's voice got hard, and he told her she was facing consequences, not punishment. There was a difference. Consequences were the natural results of her choices. Punishment was arbitrary. Haley said she didn't see the difference. My husband explained that she'd hurt her sister badly, and now she had to make amends and prove she could be trusted again. That wasn't punishment. That was accountability. Haley started crying and said everyone was treating her like a villain. My husband said she'd acted like a villain for 3 years, so she shouldn't be surprised. I could see Haley still didn't understand. She still saw herself as the victim in all this. She complained that Chloe got to decide everything and she had no say. My husband told her that's exactly how it was going to be. Chloe's needs came first now. Haley would have to accept that. The next morning, I woke up to 17 text messages in our family group chat. My sister had forwarded screenshots of another family chat I wasn't part of where relatives were arguing about what happened. My aunt defended Haley, saying adopted kids have trauma and we should understand her fear. My cousin shot back that trauma doesn't excuse 3 years of abuse. Another aunt said Chloe was being dramatic and siblings fight all the time. My uncle called Haley manipulative and said we should have seen the signs. The messages kept coming all day with relatives taking sides and arguing with each other. My husband's brother sent him a long text saying we failed both girls by working too much. My mother called to say half the family thought we were overreacting, and the other half thought we were terrible parents. By evening, I turned off my phone because I couldn't handle any more opinions from people who weren't living through this. My husband and I sat at the kitchen table and agreed we needed to step back from extended family until we made progress in therapy. The isolation felt necessary, but it also felt lonely knowing we couldn't rely on family support during the hardest time of our lives. My sister called 3 days later to say Chloe wanted to try coming home but had conditions. She wouldn't come back unless Haley stayed in her room unless we were supervising. She wanted the right to leave immediately if she felt uncomfortable. She needed a safety plan in place. My husband and I agreed to everything without hesitation. That Friday, my sister brought Chloe home for a trial weekend. Chloe walked in carrying her overnight bag and looked around like she was entering a stranger's house. My sister stayed the whole weekend to supervise and make Chloe feel safe. Haley came downstairs once on Saturday morning and Chloe's whole body went stiff. Haley grabbed a granola bar from the kitchen and went back upstairs without saying anything. The rest of Saturday, Chloe stayed in the living room with my sister while I made her favorite meals, trying to make her comfortable. Sunday morning, Chloe asked if we could install a lock on her bedroom door. My husband drove to the hardware store immediately and spent an hour installing a new lock that could only be opened from inside. Chloe tested it 3 times to make sure it worked. That afternoon, she told my sister she was ready to come home permanently, as long as the lock stayed and the rules didn't change. My sister hugged her and told her she was proud of her for being brave. After my sister left, Chloe went to her room and locked the door, and I heard her crying through the walls. Melanie called Monday morning to schedule our first joint family therapy session for the following week. She spent 30 minutes on the phone preparing me for what would happen. She explained that Chloe would be asked to share her experiences in detail. Haley would need to listen without defending herself or making excuses. My husband and I would have to acknowledge our failures as parents. I felt sick thinking about it, but I knew we had to do it. The day of the session, we all drove to Melanie's office in complete silence. The waiting room had soft chairs and nature paintings, but I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. Melanie brought us into her office and had us sit in a circle. She started by explaining the ground rules. No interrupting. No getting up and leaving. No attacking each other. Then she asked Chloe to share her experiences. Chloe pulled out her documentation notebook and started reading. She described the first time Haley told people she was an only child, the first time Haley locked her out of a family gathering, the birthday cards that never arrived, the threats about boarding school. Her voice shook, but she kept reading. Haley started crying within 5 minutes. She tried to interrupt twice to explain herself, but Melanie stopped her both times and told her this was Chloe's time to speak. Chloe read for 20 minutes straight, and by the end I was crying too. Melanie asked Haley what she heard. Haley said through tears that she heard Chloe was hurt. Melanie pushed her to be more specific. Haley tried to say she didn't mean for things to get so bad, but Melanie cut her off and said that wasn't what she asked. The session lasted 90 minutes, and it was the most brutal hour and a half of my life. When we walked out to the parking lot afterward, Haley collapsed against our car, sobbing that everyone hated her and her life was ruined. My husband and I stood there not knowing how to comfort her, because we were still processing what Chloe had shared. Rodrigo came out of the building and asked if he could talk to Haley alone. We nodded and took Chloe to sit in the car. Chloe stared straight ahead, not saying anything while I held her hand. Through the windshield, I could see Rodrigo sitting on the curb with Haley talking quietly. After 15 minutes, my husband started crying, and I realized I'd never seen him cry before. He said he felt like he'd failed both our daughters in different ways. I started crying too, and we held each other in the front seat while Chloe sat in the back. Both our daughters were deeply damaged by this situation, and we didn't know how to fix it. When Rodrigo brought Haley back to the car, her eyes were red, but she'd stopped sobbing. We drove home in silence. That night, my husband and I lay in bed holding each other, both of us emotionally exhausted and unsure how to move forward from here. 2 weeks later, the coordinator from Haley's community service placement called. Haley had started at a youth mentoring program where she was supposed to help younger kids with homework and activities. The coordinator said Haley was struggling to connect with the kids. She showed up on time and did what she was told, but she seemed to be going through the motions. She didn't seem to genuinely understand why she was there or what she was supposed to learn from the experience. The coordinator asked if we could meet to discuss Haley's attitude and approach. I scheduled a meeting for the following week. When I told Haley about the call, she got defensive and said the coordinator was being unfair. She insisted she was doing everything they asked. I explained that showing up wasn't enough. She needed to actually engage and learn from this. Haley rolled her eyes and went to her room. I realized that Haley's resistance to accountability was going to make this process take much longer than I'd hoped. The next afternoon, Chloe's friend Evie came over for the first time in years. I was so happy to see Chloe having a friend visit that I made them snacks and gave them space. An hour later, I walked past Chloe's room to put laundry away and heard them talking. Evie was saying she was sorry. I stopped in the hallway to listen. Evie admitted she knew Haley was being mean to Chloe, but didn't say anything because she was scared of Haley. She didn't think adults would believe her if she told. Chloe's voice got quiet, and she asked why Evie didn't at least tell her she noticed. Evie started crying and said she was a coward and a bad friend. I walked away feeling angry at myself. We'd created an environment where kids felt they couldn't come to us with problems, where a child could be abused in her own home and her friend was too scared to speak up. I went to my room and cried, thinking about all the ways we'd failed to protect Chloe. In our next therapy session, Melanie had us do an exercise where each person shared how the situation had affected them personally. Chloe talked about her anxiety and nightmares. Haley talked about feeling like everyone hated her. When it was my husband's turn, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said he'd been struggling with depression and guilt for weeks. He admitted he'd been avoiding coming home from work because he couldn't face what we'd allowed to happen under our own roof. He said every time he looked at Chloe, he felt ashamed. Every time he looked at Haley, he felt angry and confused. He didn't know how to be a good father to either of them anymore. I stared at him, realizing our marriage was in serious trouble. We'd been so focused on the girls that we hadn't dealt with how this was destroying us. Melanie listened carefully, and then recommended we start couples counseling in addition to family therapy. She gave us the name of a therapist who specialized in helping couples through family crises. I felt overwhelmed thinking about adding another layer of therapy to our already packed schedule, but I knew she was right. Haley's part-time job at a local restaurant lasted exactly 2 weeks before they let her go. She came home crying that the manager was unfair and had it out for her. She said she'd done everything right, but the manager blamed her for things that weren't her fault. My husband called the restaurant to ask what happened. The manager explained that Haley was consistently late for her shifts. She was rude to customers when they asked questions. She blamed other servers when orders got messed up. The manager said she'd given Haley multiple warnings, but Haley's attitude never improved. My husband thanked her and hung up. He told Haley she needed to find another job immediately. He said we wouldn't tolerate her victim mentality anymore. Haley tried to argue, but my husband raised his voice and told her to stop making excuses. She needed to take responsibility for her actions and her attitude. Haley stomped upstairs and slammed her door. Chloe started summer school the following week to make up for missed opportunities. She'd signed up for an art class and a creative writing class. Both were small classes with teachers who knew about her situation. After the first week, her art teacher sent home a note saying Chloe was bright and engaged. She participated actively, and her work showed real talent. The creative writing teacher called to say Chloe had written a powerful personal essay and asked permission to submit it to a student writing contest. I said yes, and felt proud watching Chloe thrive when given the right support. At the same time, I felt heartbroken that we hadn't noticed she was struggling before. She'd been held back by her anxiety at home for 3 years, and we'd missed all the signs. Seeing her succeed now just highlighted how much we'd failed her when she needed us most. In therapy the following week, Haley had a breakthrough moment. Rodrigo was working with her on understanding her motivation and fear. He asked her directly if she knew what she was doing was wrong while she was doing it. Haley was quiet for a long time. Then she admitted yes. She said she knew it was wrong, but she couldn't stop herself because she was terrified of losing us. She described the constant fear that we would love Chloe more because she was our biological child. She said making Chloe invisible felt like the only way to secure her place in the family. If Chloe didn't exist, then we couldn't choose Chloe over her. Rodrigo listened and then helped her see how her fear became a self-fulfilling prophecy. By trying to eliminate the competition, she'd made us question whether we could trust her. She'd created the exact situation she was afraid of. Haley started crying and said she understood that now but didn't know how to fix it. Rodrigo told her that understanding was the first step, but fixing it would take a long time and a lot of hard work. At our next therapy session, Melanie brought up something called restorative justice. She explained that Haley needed to make amends directly to Chloe in ways that actually mattered to Chloe. We sat around Melanie's office while she outlined a plan. Haley would write letters of apology to everyone she'd lied to about Chloe. She'd return all the stolen items and money. She'd find ways to help fix Chloe's relationships with relatives who'd been shut out. Haley sat with her arms crossed listening. She nodded when Melanie asked if she understood. She agreed to do it, but I could tell from her face she was doing it because she had to, not because she really got why it mattered. Her eyes kept darting to the clock on the wall. She picked at her fingernails. When Melanie asked if she had questions, Haley just shrugged and said no. My husband reached over and squeezed my hand. We both knew this was going to be a long process. The first letter Haley wrote was to my mother about the heirloom necklace. She spent 3 days working on it with Rodrigo's help. When she finally gave it to us to mail, I read it before sealing the envelope. It was short, but specific. Haley admitted she'd taken the necklace and lied about it being meant for her. She apologized for keeping my mother from having a relationship with Chloe. She said she'd return the necklace immediately. 2 days later, my mother called me crying. I stood in the kitchen holding the phone while she sobbed. She said she'd been wrong to judge our parenting. She admitted she'd made assumptions without knowing the full story. She wanted to help Chloe heal. She offered to take Chloe on a grandmother-granddaughter trip to reconnect. Just the two of them for a long weekend. When I told Chloe about the offer, she bit her lip and looked uncertain. She asked if she had to go. I told her it was completely her choice. After thinking for a minute, she said okay, she'd try it. I felt grateful that at least one family relationship was starting to get repaired. My husband and I started couples counseling with a different therapist the following week. Her office was in a different building across town. In our first session, we sat on opposite ends of a couch. The therapist asked what brought us in. My husband spoke first. He admitted he'd been blaming me for not noticing what was happening with the girls. Then I admitted I'd been blaming him for the same thing. We'd been avoiding each other at home. We'd been sleeping on different schedules. The therapist listened and then helped us see that we were both guilty of the same thing. We'd both put work ahead of family. We'd both missed the signs. We'd both failed our daughters in the same ways. She said we needed to rebuild our partnership before we could parent effectively through this crisis. We made a plan. Weekly date nights starting that Friday. Daily check-ins about our feelings even if it was just 5 minutes. No more avoiding each other. My husband reached across the couch and took my hand. It was the first time we'd touched in weeks. Haley found a new job at a grocery store near our house. She started as a bagger working evening shifts. The first week she complained about how boring it was. The second week she stopped complaining. By the end of the month, her manager called to tell us Haley was doing well. She showed up on time. She was polite to customers. She worked hard without being asked. When Haley brought home her first full paycheck, she sat at the kitchen table staring at it. She seemed proud. She deposited most of it in her savings account. Then she used some of the money to buy Chloe a gift. It was a set of art supplies Chloe had mentioned wanting months ago. Haley left it on Chloe's desk with a note that just said, "Sorry." Chloe came downstairs holding the box. She thanked Haley politely, but her voice was flat. She took the supplies back to her room. There was no warmth in the exchange, but at least it happened. During our next family therapy session, Melanie said it was time for Chloe to tell Haley directly how the 3 years had affected her. Chloe sat forward in her chair. She looked at Haley and started talking. She described feeling worthless in her own home. She talked about being invisible. She explained how she'd been afraid every single day that we'd send her away. Her voice shook, but she kept going. She told Haley about the panic attacks and the nightmares. She said she'd felt like she didn't matter to anyone. Haley sat completely still listening. For the first time, she didn't interrupt. She didn't make excuses. She didn't defend herself. When Chloe finished, there was silence. Then Haley said, "I'm sorry." Her voice was quiet and steady. It didn't sound defensive or automatic. It sounded real. Melanie leaned forward and pointed out that this was the first time Haley had shown genuine accountability. It was just a small moment, but it felt important. We planned Chloe's 17th birthday party for the following weekend. We invited her friends from the school and the relatives who'd been supportive. We decorated the living room with streamers and balloons in her favorite colors. Haley helped set up without being asked. She arranged the food table. She made sure the drinks were stocked. She hung the banner over the doorway. During the party, she stayed in the background. She didn't try to join conversations. She didn't make it about herself. She just helped when things needed doing and stayed out of the way otherwise. Near the end of the party, Chloe was opening presents. She unwrapped a gift from my sister and smiled. Then she looked over at Haley. For just a second, she smiled at her too. It was brief and careful, but it was real. Haley smiled back. My husband saw it happen and grabbed my arm. We both felt like we'd witnessed something impossible. Rodrigo asked to meet with us without the girls present. We sat in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. He explained that Haley was starting to understand something important. Our love wasn't a limited resource she had to compete for. There was enough for both daughters. But he warned us this was just intellectual understanding. She knew it in her head but hadn't accepted it emotionally yet. Her heart still believed she had to fight for her place. He said Haley would need ongoing therapy to fully internalize the concept. My husband asked how long that would take. Rodrigo looked at us seriously. He said it could be years, maybe many years. Some adoption trauma takes a lifetime to fully process. We needed to be patient and committed for the long term. My husband nodded slowly. I felt the weight of that timeline settle over us. On Thursday evening, Chloe came into the kitchen while I was making dinner. She asked if she could invite Haley to get ice cream. Just the two of them. No parents. I almost dropped the knife I was holding. My husband looked up from his laptop at the table. We both stared at her. Chloe shifted her weight nervously. She said she wanted to try talking to Haley alone. We told her we supported whatever she wanted to do. Haley agreed when Chloe asked her. They left together in Haley's car. My husband and I sat at the kitchen table not knowing what to say. They were gone for over an hour. When they came back, Chloe went straight to her room. Haley came into the kitchen and said they'd talked about some stuff. She didn't give details. She looked exhausted, but not defensive. Her shoulders were slumped. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. I took it as a sign that maybe they were finding their way toward each other. At our next family therapy session, Melanie suggested we create a family mission statement. Something about our values and goals as a family unit. We spent the whole session working on it. Each person contributed ideas. I suggested honesty. My husband added respect. Chloe wanted something about making space for everyone's needs. Then Haley spoke up. She suggested adding something about second chances and growth. Chloe looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded and said, "Okay." We wrote it all down together. Melanie helped us organize the ideas into clear statements. When we finished, we had a full page of commitments to each other. We got it printed and framed that weekend. We hung it in our living room where everyone could see it. Melanie said it was a real reminder of our commitment to change. Something we could look at when things got hard. My husband came home from work on Friday with news. His boss had offered him a promotion. It came with a significant raise and better benefits, but it would require longer hours and regular travel. He'd be gone multiple nights each week. His boss wanted an answer by Monday. My husband sat us all down at dinner and explained the situation. Then he said he was going to turn it down. He told his boss the next day that his family needed him present right now. The promotion would have to wait. When he told me his decision, I felt tears in my eyes. I realized we were both finally putting our family first. We celebrated that night with takeout and a movie. Even Haley seemed to understand what he was giving up for us. She thanked him quietly before going to bed. It felt like we were all moving in the same direction for the first time in years. 3 months slipped by faster than I expected. We gathered in the living room on a Saturday afternoon to talk about Haley's college plans. The college admissions office had sent an email 2 weeks earlier saying they would reconsider her enrollment if she submitted a personal statement about what she'd learned. Haley sat on the couch with a notebook in her lap. She'd been working on the essay with Rodrigo for the past month. My husband and I sat across from her. Chloe was at her friend's house. Haley opened the notebook and started reading. Her voice shook at first but grew steadier as she went. She wrote about the fear that drove her to erase Chloe. She described specific moments when she made choices to hurt her sister and explained what she understood now about those choices. She talked about her work in therapy and the community service that taught her about accountability. When she finished reading, my husband and I looked at each other. The essay was honest in a way that surprised me. It didn't make excuses or try to paint Haley as a victim. It acknowledged real harm and real growth. I told Haley the essay was good. My husband nodded and said it showed real understanding. Haley closed the notebook and asked if we thought the college would accept it. I said I thought they would. She submitted it that evening. Chloe walked through the front door on her first day of junior year with her backpack slung over one shoulder. She dropped it by the stairs and came into the kitchen where I was starting dinner. I asked how her day went. She smiled and told me she'd joined the debate club and signed up for the school newspaper. She'd made friends with 2 girls in her English class. They'd invited her to study together on Thursday. I felt relief wash through me. Chloe still went to therapy every week. She still had anxiety that showed up in tight shoulders and quick breathing when things got stressful, but she'd learned ways to manage it. She practiced breathing exercises. She kept a journal. She talked to us when she felt overwhelmed instead of hiding it. 2 weeks into the school year, Mr. Garcia called me. He said he wanted to meet to discuss Chloe's progress. We scheduled it for the following Tuesday. My husband and I sat in his office while he pulled out Chloe's file. He told us he was amazed by how much she'd grown. Her teachers reported that she participated in class discussions and turned in strong work. She'd volunteered to help organize the school's Mental Health Awareness Week. Mr. Garcia said Chloe had mentioned wanting to study psychology in college. He thought she'd be excellent at it given her own experiences and her natural empathy. When we got home, I told Chloe what Mr. Garcia had said. She looked surprised but pleased. She said she'd been thinking about it. She wanted to help other kids who felt invisible. The letter from Haley's college arrived in early October. Haley grabbed it from the mailbox and brought it inside with shaking hands. She stood in the kitchen and stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. My husband and I waited. She tore it open and read silently. Then she looked up with tears in her eyes. They'd accepted her re-enrollment for the spring semester. She could start in January. There were conditions attached. She had to maintain regular therapy sessions. She had to submit progress reports every month. She had to meet with a student life counselor weekly for the first semester. Haley nodded as she read through the requirements. She said she'd do whatever they asked. That evening, we ordered pizza to celebrate. Haley seemed excited but nervous. She kept looking at Chloe across the table. Finally, she asked if they could video chat when she was at the school. She said she didn't want to lose the progress they'd made. Chloe looked surprised. She put down her pizza slice and thought for a moment. Then she said yes. She said they could chat once a week if Haley wanted. Haley's face broke into a genuine smile. I watched them and felt something shift. It wasn't the easy sister relationship from when they were little. It was something more careful and deliberate, but it felt real in a way the old relationship never had. My mother called in late October to say she wanted to host a family gathering. It would be the first time everyone came together since the graduation party. I felt nervous about it, but agreed. We needed to try moving forward. The gathering was at my mother's house on a Sunday afternoon. We arrived to find most of the extended family already there. The room went quiet when we walked in. Haley stayed close to us. Chloe held my hand. My aunt was the first to come over. She hugged Chloe and told her she was glad to see her. Other relatives followed. Some were warmer than others. My uncle made a point of talking to Haley about her college plans. He told her he was proud she was working to make things right. My mother pulled Chloe aside after lunch. I watched them talking on the back porch. My mother's face was serious. She put her hand on Chloe's shoulder. When they came back inside, Chloe's eyes were red, but she looked lighter somehow. Later, my mother told me she'd apologized for not being more present in Chloe's life. She said she'd been too quick to judge our parenting instead of supporting Chloe. Several relatives approached Haley throughout the afternoon. They told her they could see she was trying. They acknowledged the work she was doing. It wasn't perfect. Some family members still kept their distance. Some conversations felt stiff and awkward, but people were making an effort. We left feeling like we'd taken a step forward. Our therapy session the following week felt different. Melanie had us sit in a circle. She said she wanted each of us to share one thing we'd learned from everything that had happened. Chloe went first. She said she'd learned to use her voice and set boundaries. She said she'd spent too long being silent and it had almost destroyed her. Now she knew she had the right to take up space. Haley went next. Her voice was quiet. She said she'd learned that fear and insecurity could make you hurt the people you loved most. She said she'd been so afraid of losing us that she'd tried to eliminate the competition. She understood now that love wasn't something you had to fight for in a healthy family. My husband spoke third. He said he'd learned that being present was more important than being successful. He said he'd spent years chasing promotions and bigger paychecks while missing what was happening in his own home. He'd learned that his daughters needed his attention more than they needed anything money could buy. I went last. I said I'd learned our family was stronger than I thought, even when broken. I said I'd believed we were shattered beyond repair after the graduation party. But watching everyone work through the pain and choose to keep trying had shown me that families could heal if people were willing to do the hard work. Melanie nodded. She said those insights showed real growth. She reminded us that understanding wasn't the same as being healed. We still had work ahead of us. Haley came to me in mid-November with papers in her hand. She said she'd written something for Chloe. She asked if I'd read it first. I took the papers to my room and sat on the bed. It was a letter. 6 pages long. Haley had described specific incidents where she'd hurt Chloe. The time she deleted the email about Chloe's art show. The day she took the heirloom necklace. The family gathering where she locked Chloe outside. Each incident was detailed with what Haley had done and what she wished she'd done instead. The letter didn't make excuses. It acknowledged the harm and the choice behind each action. At the end, Haley wrote that she understood if Chloe never forgave her. She said she was writing this not to earn forgiveness, but because Chloe deserved to know that someone remembered and acknowledged what had been done to her. I gave the letter back to Haley and told her it was honest and important. She asked if she should give it to Chloe. I said yes. Haley left it on Chloe's desk that evening. Chloe found it before bed. She came downstairs an hour later with red eyes. She told us the letter meant something to her. She said it mattered that Haley remembered specific moments. She took the letter back upstairs. Later, I saw it in her nightstand drawer. She'd folded it carefully and kept it. We started new family traditions in December. Every Sunday, we had dinner together where everyone shared their high and low points of the week. We took turns choosing activities for monthly family outings. We kept a journal in the living room where we wrote encouraging notes to each other. The traditions felt forced at first. Sunday dinners were awkward with long silences. The family journal sat empty for days. But gradually things shifted. Haley wrote a note in the journal thanking Chloe for agreeing to video chat. Chloe wrote back saying she was proud of Haley for getting into college. My husband wrote about being grateful for second chances. I wrote about seeing our family heal. The monthly outings got easier. Chloe picked a museum trip in December. Haley suggested ice skating in January. We laughed more. The silences felt less heavy. Sunday dinners became something we looked forward to instead of dreading. I was making dinner on a Thursday evening when I heard laughter from the living room. Real laughter. Not the polite kind, but the kind that came from genuine amusement. I walked to the doorway and saw Chloe and Haley sitting on the couch together. They were looking at old photos on Chloe's phone. Haley was pointing at one and saying something about a family vacation when they were little. Chloe was giggling. They were remembering a funny moment from before everything went wrong. I stood there watching them. My chest felt tight. I had to step outside onto the back porch because tears were running down my face. My husband found me there a few minutes later. He put his arm around me and asked if I was okay. I nodded and told him what I'd seen. He pulled me close. We stood there together, acknowledging that we were watching something we weren't sure would ever happen. Our daughters were finding their way back to each other. It wasn't the relationship they'd had before. It was more careful and built on honesty instead of assumptions. But it was real, and it was growing. 4 months after the graduation party, we had our final family therapy session with Melanie. She sat across from us with her notes. She told us she was impressed by the work we'd all done. She listed specific changes she'd observed. Haley taking accountability. Chloe finding her voice. My husband and I being more present. She said we'd made real progress. Then she reminded us this was ongoing. She said healing wasn't a destination but a process. We would have setbacks. We would struggle. The important thing was continuing to choose honesty and effort. She recommended we keep going with individual therapy for both girls. She suggested my husband and I continue couples counseling. But she was graduating us from intensive family therapy to monthly check-ins. We could call if we needed extra sessions, but she felt we had the tools to manage on our own. We thanked her. Haley asked if she'd failed us by not fixing everything. Melanie smiled and said families weren't broken things that got fixed. They were living systems that grew and changed. We were growing in a healthier direction. That was what mattered. January arrived faster than I expected. Haley's departure date for college was January 15th. She spent the week before packing and organizing. She seemed excited but kept getting quiet and distant. I found her sitting on Chloe's bed one afternoon. They were talking in low voices. Haley was saying she was worried about leaving. She said she didn't want their relationship to fall apart again. Chloe told her they'd figure it out. That evening, Chloe disappeared into her room for hours. She came down after dinner with a box wrapped in newspaper. She handed it to Haley. Haley looked surprised. She opened it carefully. Inside was a care package. Snacks, a blanket, photos of the family including several of Haley and Chloe together. There was a note that said good luck. Haley stared at the photos. Tears ran down her face. She looked at Chloe and tried to say thank you, but her voice broke. Chloe hugged her. It was brief and a little awkward, but it was genuine. I watched from the kitchen doorway with my hand over my mouth. My husband stood next to me. We didn't say anything. We just stood there witnessing our daughters choosing each other despite everything that had happened. Haley's last night at home arrived faster than any of us expected. We settled onto the couch together with a bowl of popcorn between us and picked a comedy none of us had seen before. Chloe sat in the middle, which felt intentional on her part. She wedged herself between Haley and me with her legs tucked underneath her. The movie started, and for the first 20 minutes, everyone stayed quiet and focused on the screen. Then something funny happened, and we all laughed at the same time. The sound filled the living room in a way it hadn't in years. My husband reached over and squeezed my hand. About halfway through the movie, I noticed Haley's hand moving slowly across the couch cushion. She placed it palm up near Chloe's knee like an offering. Chloe glanced down at it. For several seconds, she didn't move. Then she slid her hand into Haley's and their fingers interlaced. They stayed like that through the rest of the film. Neither of them pulled away or shifted position. My husband caught my eye over the girls' heads and I saw tears on his cheeks. I nodded at him and he nodded back. We didn't need to say it out loud. We were going to be okay. The drive to Haley's college took 4 hours and we left early on a Saturday morning. Haley sat in the back with boxes and bags piled around her while Chloe rode up front with me. My husband drove and played music that nobody complained about. We stopped for breakfast at a diner halfway there, and Haley ordered pancakes while Chloe got waffles. They argued playfully about which was better, and it sounded like normal sister banter. When we arrived at the campus, Haley's dorm building looked old but well-maintained with ivy growing up one side. We hauled everything up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. Haley's room was small with 2 beds and 2 desks and 1 window overlooking the quad. Her roommate hadn't arrived yet, so we picked the bed by the window and started unpacking. Chloe took charge of decorating and hung string lights above the bed while Haley organized her desk supplies. My husband assembled a small bookshelf we'd bought. I made the bed with the sheets Haley had picked out. The roommate showed up an hour later with her parents. She introduced herself as Jenny and seemed friendly and easygoing. She looked at Chloe and asked if she was Haley's sister. Haley didn't hesitate. She put her arm around Chloe's shoulders and said, "Yes, this is my little sister Chloe." The pride in her voice was unmistakable. Chloe's whole face lit up and she beamed at Haley. I turned away and pretended to fix the curtains because tears were running down my face again. My husband came over and handed me a tissue without saying anything. The first month with Haley away felt strange in the house. Her room sat empty and quiet, but she kept her promise about staying connected. She video chatted with Chloe every Tuesday and Friday evening at 7 o'clock. I'd hear Chloe's laughter coming from her room as they talked. Sometimes the calls lasted 10 minutes, and sometimes they went for an hour. They discussed Haley's classes and her new friends, and the terrible cafeteria food. Chloe told her about school and the play audition she was preparing for. Haley asked follow-up questions and remembered details from previous conversations. She wanted to know about Chloe's day and her feelings and her plans. A care package arrived for Chloe in the 3rd week. Inside were snacks and a sweatshirt from Haley's college, and a note that said, "Thinking of you." Chloe wore the sweatshirt to the school the next day. She sent Haley a photo of herself in it, and Haley responded with 3 heart emojis. My husband and I watched these small moments of connection and felt hopeful. The relationship they were building looked different from what they'd had before. It was more careful and deliberate, but it was honest, and it was growing. Chloe's therapist called us in for a parent meeting in October. She sat across from us in her office with Chloe's file open on her desk. She told us that Chloe's anxiety scores had dropped significantly over the past 3 months. The panic attacks had decreased in frequency and intensity. Chloe was sleeping better and eating regularly and engaging more with her peers. The therapist said Chloe was making real progress in trusting others and believing she deserved space in her own family. Then she mentioned something that surprised us. Chloe was thinking about trying out for the school play. The fall production was a comedy, and they needed students for supporting roles. Chloe had never shown interest in theater before. The therapist explained that Chloe spent years training herself to be invisible. Acting in a play meant being seen on purpose. It was a huge step. We drove home and talked to Chloe that evening. She admitted she was nervous but wanted to try. We encouraged her to audition and promised to attend every performance if she got cast. She practiced her monologue in the living room while we watched. Her voice shook at first but got stronger as she continued. Auditions happened the following week. Chloe came home grinning and announced she'd gotten a supporting role as the main character's best friend. She had 15 lines and would be in 4 scenes. My husband picked her up and spun her around. I called Haley to share the news, and Haley screamed with excitement through the phone. My husband and I had our regular couples therapy session on a Thursday afternoon. We'd been going every week since August, and the work was paying off. Our therapist asked us to reflect on how our marriage had changed since the crisis began. My husband spoke first. He said he felt closer to me now than he had in years. We were communicating more and making decisions together instead of parallel to each other. I agreed and added that we'd both made major changes in how we prioritized our time. My husband had turned down the promotion. I'd delegated more at work and stopped bringing files home on weekends. We were present for family dinners and school events. We knew what was happening in our daughters' lives. The therapist nodded and said she'd observed significant growth in our partnership. Then she asked a harder question. Could we forgive ourselves for the years we'd missed? My husband's eyes filled with tears. He said he didn't know if he could. I reached for his hand and told him we couldn't get back the lost years, but we could make sure we were present for the years ahead. That was all we could control now. He nodded and squeezed my hand. The therapist reminded us that healing wasn't linear. We would have bad days, but the commitment to change was what mattered most. Thanksgiving arrived cold and bright. Haley came home the night before, and Chloe helped her carry her bags inside. The house felt full again in a good way. We spent Thanksgiving morning cooking together. Haley made mashed potatoes while Chloe worked on the green bean casserole. My husband handled the turkey, and I managed everything else. We bumped into each other in the kitchen and laughed about it. The table was set by early afternoon with the good dishes we only used for holidays. We sat down together as the sun started to set. My husband said we should go around and share what we were thankful for. Haley went first. She said she was grateful for second chances and for a family that didn't give up on her even when she didn't deserve it. Her voice cracked on the last few words. Chloe went next. She said she was thankful for her voice and for learning she was allowed to take up space. My husband said he was thankful for our family and for the opportunity to do better. I said I was thankful for all of them and for the fact that we were sitting here together being honest. We ate slowly and talked about small things. Chloe and Haley sat next to each other and their conversation flowed easily. They reminisced about a vacation from years ago and laughed at the same memories. After dinner, we played board games in the living room. Haley and Chloe teamed up against us and won 2 out of 3 games. As everyone got ready for bed, I stood in the hallway and looked at my family. We weren't completely healed and probably never would be. The damage from those 3 years would always be part of our story. But we were together, and we were trying. We were choosing each other every single day. Right now, that felt like enough. And that's the end of this one. I like stories that leave us with something real to think about. If it helped you in some small way, then it was worth telling.